All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to introduce ourselves and then feel free to introduce yourselves and your teacher. My name is Zach Eastburn. I am an attorney in Madison, Wisconsin.
Welcome, and my name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
And I'm Robert Dian. I teach American government at the University of Evansville.
Good afternoon, judges. We are Reno High School Unit 4. My name is Blair Hall, and I will be attending New York University.
My name is Caroline Lawn, and I will be attending the University of Notre Dame.
My name is Jack Allen. I will be attending the University of Nevada. Our unit coach and teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
All right, today we'll be doing question 2, and I will read the question and you guys can start your opening statement. Question 2 says, members of Congress are not only legislators, but they are also inquisitorial and meet frequently to inspect the conduct of the public officers. How effectively do you believe Congress has used its investigatory power? Explain the differences, if any, between Congress's power to investigate and the power of oversight. Which power, in your opinion, is more significant? And finally, how effectively do you believe Congress has used its oversight powers? You may begin.
The power of inquiry, with the process to enforce it, is an essential and appropriate auxiliary to the legislative function. This statement by Justice Willis Van Devonter in the 1927 case McGrain versus Daugherty officially established that congressional investigation has a legislative purpose and is therefore constitutional. While this case did set a precedent for Congress's investigative powers, Congress has been extremely effective in utilizing investigations ever since the 1792 case when Congress investigated General Arthur St. Clair following a significant military defeat by Native Americans. Among other notable congressional investigations are the Teapot Dome investigation in 1921, the Watergate investigation in 1973, and the most recent investigation into former President Trump for inciting the January 6th Capitol riot.
In fact, Congress has been so effective in its investigations that it has exceeded the essential and appropriate purpose, which was demonstrated in the 1950s by Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin, who used his congressional platform to produce investigations that resulted in numerous highly publicized, indiscriminate allegations. Similarly, the House Un-American Activities Committees aggressively threatened witnesses into relinquishing names of communist sympathizers from 1938 to 1974. This overstep in Congress's use of their investigatory powers is in part due to the judiciary, as seen in the 1958 case Barenblatt versus U.S., which held that Congress could compel people to answer questions in an investigation.
While congressional investigation often makes headlines for its excitement of holding hearings, obtaining confidential documents, and probing into executive affairs to uncover corruption, oversight is more important. The vesting clause of Article 1, Section 1 implies the widespread power of oversight, which encompasses congressional investigations. Oversight also allows Congress to monitor the effectiveness of the law, while ensuring that the executive branch is properly enforcing it. However, the 2020 case, Trump versus Mazars, weakened the oversight powers of Congress by instituting a very specific balancing test to determine whether Congress may subpoena the president for specific documents.
While both powers are an essential and appropriate auxiliary to the legislative function, oversight is more significant because the power of oversight relies solely upon the legislative, while the power of investigation is shared with the executive branch, as illustrated by the role of inspector generals. Additionally, oversight is directly related to Congress's legislative function. James Madison supported this assertion in Federalist 51 when he wrote, "In framing a government, you must oblige it to control itself."
However, Congress has not utilized their oversight powers effectively and has thereby allowed the executive to expand so greatly that now Congress struggles to oversee all of it. The executive branch had just 4 departments in 1789, yet today there are 15 departments, 96 independent executive units, and 220 components of the executive departments, yet there is no authoritative list. Furthermore, the failure of oversight can be seen in the House's inaction to form an independent commission for the purpose of inspecting detainee maltreatment in the War on Terror in 2016, despite Congress being aware of prisoner abuse and from the previous Abu Ghraib scandal. Similarly, the conflict between parties in the House Intelligence Committee over the Russian investigation demonstrates how hyperpartisanship has become a massive obstacle to effective oversight by promoting party over principle.
In his report on the inquiry of Robert Morris, James Madison claimed that Congress should possess itself of the fullest information in order to do justice to the country and to public officers. Madison's point aligns with that of Justice Van Devanter to illustrate that Congress must first perform its duties of oversight so that situations may not fester to the point where an investigation is necessary to clean up the ugly aftermath. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for that opening statement. We have a few questions here. You know, one of the things that you brought up is you cited, I think, a Van Devanter opinion that confirmed that investigation has a legislative purpose and therefore Congress can do it. Is there a limit to what Congress can investigate? And if so, what is it and why?
Absolutely. As illustrated in the case Kilbourne versus Thompson, in which the Kilbourne test was a result of that. This test institutes 4 parts, which really requires a specific legislative purpose. And some of these requirements are that the area that Congress is investigating cannot impede into the areas that are under the judicial supervision or executive supervision, along with the fact that whatever Congress is investigating must be something that Congress can legislate effectively under.
Congress has surpassed these limitations in multiple ways. An example being the Lavender Scare, which came in contingency with the Red Scare, as mentioned before with Senator McCarthy. The Lavender Scare was an investigation of gay people within the government, and they were similarly rooted out through these investigations, which was an overstep of that investigations. And there are other investigations which are within those bounds, including the 9/11 investigations and that of Watergate.
It is oftentimes, it was seen in the opinion of Hutchinson versus US in 1962 that oftentimes investigation, according to Justice Brennan, is solely conducted to punish the investigated either publicly or through prosecution, which shows that this is either a result of Congress overstepping and publicly shaming people, which is seen in the Monica Lewinsky scandal in the 90s, or through prosecution, as seen in my colleague's Caroline's case.
Are there any powers that Congress has given up to the executive branch or to the judicial branch? And if so, what are they?
In one way, the congressional branch has not necessarily given up, but they've ceded the power of impeachment. It has lost its essential purpose. In the last impeachments that happened, they did not reach their intended purpose. In this way, Congress has somewhat ceded this over to the executive in the sense that it's less of a check and more of a public beatdown of the executive.
In relation more to oversight and investigation, Congress enacted the Reorganization Act of 1939, and this really allowed the executive branch to take control of its own reorganization. And as a result, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was able to add another executive agency. And because of this, it has really allowed the executive branch to expand so much that Congress now struggles to oversee all of it.
Furthermore, the ability of the Justice Department to investigate the executive branch when the Justice Department is part of the executive branch has led to the restriction of Congress's ability to properly oversee it.
You mentioned the influence of partisanship and polarization. I'd like you to think a little bit out loud about how you distinguish between a legitimate investigation and a partisan investigation. And are there any bright line standards that could help us?
Well, I think one great example of an investigation which was highly polarized but was effective is the Watergate scandal in 1975, in which President Nixon was an extremely partisan figure, and it was extremely polarized, yet both parties formed a bipartisan committee and were able to put principle over party in that situation.
Another example of an investigation that may not have served its actual legislative purpose and may have been fueled by partisanship are the Benghazi investigations. In many ways, it is seen as a way to make Hillary Clinton look bad on the side of the conservatives. And in this way, they may have succeeded, with the investigations taking a very long time and being a very long ordeal. And in that sense, it was very partisan and may not have served a legislative purpose.
I would like to argue that it's very difficult now to determine whether an investigation is truly partisan or not, because as seen with the Mueller investigation, which was an investigation into the 2016 election, President Trump called this a witch hunt. However, the investigation itself was more really just looking into the security. So now even valid investigations are being called witch hunts when a certain party may have done something wrong and is being called out for that.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the things that you brought up, which was that there is this proliferation of executive agencies. And I understand that, the historical, there's 4 departments, and now there's all these agencies. Is it a violation of separation of powers that the agencies exist and appear to have a lawmaking function?
No, they are not in a separation. They are not a breaking of the separation of the powers in the sense that they do serve an executive purpose. And through this, they were created through the executive through in many ways, shapes and forms, with the most recent being that of Homeland Security in response to the 9/11 attacks and the war on terror.
I would like to disagree with my colleague that these agencies almost are certainly a violation of the separation of powers. And this really occurred around the time of the New Deal era with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he really became one of the first presidents to jump into that role of a legislative making president and creating all these agencies along with that to help with the legislation creation process.
Furthermore, the entirety of our government has grown since in Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton calling the executive branch the sword. And it is even more so prevalent today since our population is so much greater and our government must conform to that population.
Thank you.
How does Congress use its power of the purse to enforce its oversight powers?
So, you go, Blair.
The power of the purse is seen through the division of funds in Congress, where the majority party gets 2/3 of the funding for congressional oversight, and it is up to the party to divide the funds into which committees, which subcommittees to investigate. For example, and most recently, 2020, the coronavirus crisis allowed funding to the House Select Subcommittee to greatly increase.
I would like to argue that Congress uses oversight really to protect its power of the purse, as seen with the Truman Committee, when Senator Truman was such a great advocate of oversight, especially within the defense spending, that he would go down to these different troops to make sure that the military money was being spent effectively and efficiently.
Yay!
All right, so we're going to do a little feedback here. And I just want to start out by saying I am just very impressed with this presentation. Really from the beginning until the end, you guys were incredibly effective in advocating, both in your opening statement and in questions and answers. And that is it's a pretty distinguishing feature for you guys, that you would have a very clear, cogent opening statement where you began with explaining your opinion on whether or not oversight is more important, and first of all talking about how investigation has a legislative purpose, tying it to a Supreme Court case, and then going on into the failure of oversight, really, and going to the proliferation of the executive state. I really appreciated then when we got into the question and answer phase with the questions that I asked. The first one being, is there a limit on what Congress can investigate? You immediately answered with, another Supreme Court case that expressly delineated whether or not Congress can investigate something based on a four-part test. You know, as a lawyer, it's music to my ears. So really an excellent example there. I also think that with my second question, what you did was you with the violation of separation of powers was one of you gave an answer that was like, yes, I think, or I don't think it's a violation of separation of powers. These agencies serve an executive purpose. They can execute faithfully the laws that the Congress has enacted. But then someone else said, I disagreed. Here's why. You know, this is a violation of separation of powers, and implicit in that is that the Constitution doesn't give anything about agencies, and FDR did all these things, and with the New Deal, it was a great explanation, both fully well supported. And that's the point of this, right? Isn't that you may agree and disagree on these things, but there is a way to support both sides of that argument. And I have done that the most effectively of anyone I've seen so far. So excellent work there. If I had, I would like to see, you know, more of the point counterpoint, but it's sort of a minor point, just because you did it so well in that one answer. So I'm very happy. You guys did a great job. You should feel very proud of yourselves.
I just have an initial one word comment that I think you all in Nevada would understand. Bingo! You covered all the squares. You really, really did a great job. You know, you talked about investigations. You started back in 1792 with the American Indians, and then you came Teapot Dome and McCarthy and Watergate, and you just have a wealth of knowledge and information. You responded. Your initial format presentation was just great. I'm expecting that perhaps all of you, as you go off to your universities of choice, that after you get done with your undergraduate school, you'll be going on to law school, because you were quoting legal cases left and right, and opinions of the justices and so forth. Just very well done. Just a small part I'd say to you, that when I was talking about has Congress ceded power to the other branches, you might want to mention that to some extent the executive branch, through its executive orders, has taken a lot of those powers. But that is such a piddling little comment to make as a suggestion, because overall you just did a great job. And I particularly like the modern phrase of a public beatdown. You just did a great job. Congratulations to you. And please, you have so much knowledge and so much leadership capabilities. You all must continue to be good citizens and stay involved and participate in civic education and our government process and everything, because you're going to be great leaders for Nevada, and you're going to be great leaders for our country. And big tip of the hat to your teacher. Great job. Thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, I would agree with all that's been said. So I don't want to rehearse a lot of that's already been expressed. It was a tip-top, strong, powerful presentation. Very thoroughgoing. There were some cases we heard in your presentation that we haven't heard from other teams, and that's always impressive. Your points were made very clearly, so clearly sometimes that they were these little pearls that I had to write down. You were asked if oversight is more important. You said yes, but it gathers less attention. And I think that's exactly right. Investigations are very exciting and spicy, but the everyday work of oversight is more important. And your final comment that things should not be allowed to fester to the point where you need to have a big investigation. And that gets to the notion of fire alarms versus police patrols that you often hear about with respect to oversight processes. I liked the observation in Q&A that even a legitimate investigation can be called partisan. And I think that's the world that we live in today. One minor quibble, because this was an amazing job. A lot of responsibility was assigned to FDR for expanding the presidency, or just in general for the executive taking up legislative power. But there's a school of thought in political science where we talk about legicide. And the fundamental idea there is that Congress has willingly given its power away to the executive branch and to the bureaucratic agencies. And they don't have to give it away, and they could reclaim it. Article 1 sets them up as the first branch, and the moment that sleeping giant wants to rise, they could really do damage. They could do a beatdown if they wanted, but they don't want to, and that's what legicide looks into. All the incentive structure that makes Congress willingly want to give away its power and let other people do their work and then take credit for it later. If it works, they take credit, and if it doesn't work, they hold an investigation to yell at people for not doing it the right way. So it's a perverse incentive structure that underlies a lot of the problem here. But again, as my colleague said, you guys did a wonderful job, very impressive, and I'm proud of you and your teachers.
Thank you so much, judges.
Thank you.
Great job.